the holders of power will benefit when we start building a system that actually starts creating health and creating, people who want to work on farms because they have a healthy relationship with food and they're genuinely interested in it and want to get back out on the land. Like, we'll solve recruitment, we'll solve social license, we'll solve storytelling through system change. And farming organizations and farming bodies need to get in behind this and be the agents of that change. And right now they're being, to a large part, the handbrakes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's special guest is none other than Daniel Ebb from Dirt Road Comms and the Open Farms Initiative. Dan is what you would call a natural-born communicator. He really thrives on being able to turn complex issues into ways that we can all understand. You've probably seen his regular pieces in the Farmers Weekly, which are often quite thought-provoking. And you may have heard of him because of his Nuffield Scholar, The Home Paddock. In today's episode, we discuss his Nuffield Scholarship, his findings in that report, and has things changed since he did that in 2021. We also go into some pretty heavy topics around what does a national food strategy look like for New Zealand, how can we tell our story better, and how can we create more equitable access to not only food in New Zealand, but also to create the next generation of farmers. So, without further ado, let's get into it. How are you today, Daniel?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure to have you on. For those who aren't familiar with yourself, can you give us an intro about your background and who you are?
Yeah. As a comms person, I should probably have this a little bit more polished off the top of my head, but it's a bit of a weave, to quote Donald Trump. So I had the privilege of growing up in both an urban and a rural setting during my childhood. We moved from South Africa when I was 7 years old, and so that my dad could realise his dream, which is to become a farmer. And so after a couple of years living in Auckland, we bought a beautiful patch of land up on the Kaipara Harbour. And from about 14, I sort of did this weird backwards and forwards thing where I'd be in the city, often working at my mum's public relations company in the weeks, and then coming up to like banging fence posts and shift stock on weekends. And as an 18-year-old, I was like, why have I been cursed with having to come to this rural place when I could be, trying to meet girls? But later in life, I've realised that was a real privilege. Sort of got into comms, and as a result of that ability to sort of blend urban and rural, and after a couple of missteps in London at big PR companies, working for businesses I shouldn't have been working for and putting things in my body I shouldn't have been putting in, I started Dirt Road Comms, which is a purpose comms agency supporting just and regenerative food system transitions in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Off the back of that, launched Open Farms, which was a social impact project designed to help particularly urban people re-engage with food and farming through facilitated open farm day experiences. To date, we've helped 20,000 Kiwi families get back out on farm, a fifth of them for the first time in their life, which is pretty cool. And sort of a writer, write for Farmers Weekly, Eating the Elephant, and do a bunch of other little bitsy things, just trying to help good people do great stuff.
Yeah, you're certainly involved in quite a few different things within the agricultural field. How did you come to see the need for Dirt Road Comms within the ag industry here in New Zealand?
At one point I was in London and sort of gave myself 3 months just to follow my nose a bit. I like to say that I had a quarter life crisis, and I highly recommend it to everybody, to every 25-year-old. I came back to the farm after a long time for about 6 months just to sort of find myself, quote unquote. And off the back of that, I then had sort of 3 months, and that's when I started falling into like regenerative agriculture, into the inherent unsustainability of our food systems. And it was a time when I was looking for solutions to these problems that were starting to become a big part of who I was. Like, I wanted to do something about climate change. I wanted to do something about sort of this breakdown in political trust and all that kind of stuff. And the solutions that were being presented to me seemed ridiculous. Rockets to Mars and, alternative proteins and stuff. And it was a real joy to find that there are people doing the things that I have just been doing on the farm for 6 months, and those were the solutions. And that was a real light bulb moment. And then it was a matter of, okay, well, what skill sets do I have? Good writer, I can communicate, tell stories. I've got an internet worth of video tutorials at my fingertips to teach me how to build websites and do all these incredible things. How do I marry those two together? And that's where Dirt Road came from, is wanting to play a role in what is, I think, the most profound transition humanity is on the cusp of achieving.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you feel New Zealand is placed within that transition? You've done some time overseas and obviously working with some pretty cool companies in New Zealand.
We've got an incredibly strong hand. If we're sitting at a poker table, we've got all the chips and we've got all the best cards. Temperate environment, innovative people, etc., etc. I feel like we're resting on our laurels, and it's sort of this refrain you hear from a lot of the sector of, we're the world's most efficient producers. Yeah, true. How do we get better? Where do we go from here? Like it's important to take pause and celebrate where you've come from. But I think we are at a point in time where the external factors that will influence the success and vitality of the sector are moving so fast. Climate, access to trade, AI, they are moving at a pace that even a quote unquote young gun like me, 35, 40, young for the industry, I'm freaked out by it. If we are not moving our own systems, how we build strategies, how we connect our communities, the systems that we apply to our land use stewardship, if they are not moving at a similar pace, we are being left behind. And so that's where I feel like, and I think that applies to every agricultural nation on the planet. But we really have no excuse. We really don't.
Yeah, I probably parrot you on that. And we are in such a great position, and it's awesome to celebrate our wins. But I feel like it is taking the wind out of our sails around ingenuity. Like, why do we need to get better? There's a bit of an attitude that I feel that is being built up around why do we need to get better if we're already the best and we're much better than everyone else. And I think we do risk being left behind, and those big companies that currently come to us might start looking elsewhere because we're not as willing to, I guess, be innovative and change our approach to things or get better and share it with others.
See, that's an interesting topic, like getting left behind. I don't know if it's realistic that we'll get left behind by other agricultural, like high value agricultural producing nations. I think we'll always sort of be at the top. The thing we're going to get left behind by is these mega forces, these geopolitical and ecological forces that are moving way faster than any company's ever going to move. That's the thing that we need to be more concerned about. We have this hyper focus on producing like premium products and making sure we're getting shelf space in Shanghai supermarkets and Tesco's. That's not the thing I think that's at risk. I think there are much more fundamental bits and pieces that are at risk. I mean, just today, the Iranian parliament has sanctioned the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Like that is the thing that we need to be ahead of, not the buyer at Tesco's.
Yeah. I think just that in itself just highlights the conversation around how much of New Zealand's agriculture relies on energy from outside of our farm systems, whether that be fertilizer or supplement feed or fuel. Like when things like that happen, it has a drastic impact on us as a farming economy, and I don't think we're well prepared for that.
No, we've got a national security reserve of liquid fuel of 21 days.
Yeah, that's not very long.
Woo! Hold on to your seats, people. Yeah.
The price of everything's going to go through the roof, and when people see things are scarce, they all go out and buy more of it. So it's probably less than 21 days if you really think about it.
Much less.
Yeah. So you are a Nuffield Scholar. Can you tell us about your experience, or first of all, what actually led you to apply for it?
What I tell people is Nuffield gave me time, which is an incredibly valuable resource. I had all these ideas kicking around in my head, like, we've got to do agriculture differently. We're at a period of fundamental transformation. And I've been seeing all these, sort of bits and pieces from around the world and at home. And it gave me a year to actually distill everything into one document and sort of create a theory of change, which is really powerful. Sort of it's a foundation that I could do future work on. So the Nuffield, we were a weird year. We were 2021, so right in the middle of COVID. So our process was a little bit different. But what we were able to do was a 3-week, actually no more like a 4-week trip around New Zealand, because international travel was blocked to us. And off the back of that, as well as a whole lot of calls with people around the world, I wrote The Home Paddock, which is effectively a strategy to redesign the domestic food system. And that is as relevant as it was in 2022, we're now 2025, as it was when I wrote it. And it's been fundamental to me understanding what my role in the system is, but also creating a vision for what a livable, resilient, healthy food system looks like, not just from the farming perspective, but from sort of a society-wide perspective, which I think is a really valuable sort of viewpoint to take on the issue.
Yeah, totally. And are you seeing that that's actually becoming more pressing now that you've had a couple of years since you've written it and some of the issues that we're currently facing?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like a lot of the things that sort of compelled me to write it. At the start of most chapters, I have a signals of failure column, which is sort of these top-line stats that say, hey, this is a burning platform. How can we use agriculture to fix things? And things like youth mental health, public health in general. New Zealand is the third most obese nation in the OECD. These things haven't changed. They are systemic trends that are only getting worse, frankly, because we haven't, as a nation, enacted the kind of difficult, hard, expensive, systemic changes that will shift those trend lines. I still see food and farming as absolutely fundamental to those things.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'd probably talk about this more than I should. But it's around how like our food system and our health system are always kind of two separate conversations. But I think going forward for a healthy nation, we need to start having joining the dots there and seeing how they can actually work together and hopefully bring down some of those stats that you've talked about.
It's bizarre, isn't it? It's like I've known people have used this analogy before for climate change, but I think it applies equally well to the health system. Like if your tub is overflowing, if we have too many people with diabetes and too many people, with early onset heart conditions, etc., that's the symptom. You turn off the tap before you start treating the symptom, and the tap is so obviously, poor diet. Food be thy medicine. It is so straightforward. If you unleash access to healthy, fresh, well-grown whole foods, sit back, and 5 years later, your health system suddenly returns to a sustainable baseline because you're not putting as much load of pressure on it. Like, how is this that hard to understand? It's really simple.
I totally agree.
If I have a pizza, if I sit down and smash a pizza and half a bottle of Coke, which I obviously never do, maybe have a couple of beers as well, I feel rough. My body's telling me. Anyway, it's bizarre.
It is bizarre, and it's like all that cost that we are investing at the other end of it could be invested into the farming and actually probably reduce the health system stresses that we currently face. And people want more and more money invested in health.
Yeah, and when we get carbon drawdown, we get mental health because people are on farm. It's just people say there are no silver bullets. Yeah. Mainstreaming food and access to food and farming and mainstreaming access to healthy, fresh produce is as close to a silver bullet as we have in New Zealand when it comes to health, mental well-being, and any number of other challenges.
Yeah. As a country, it's probably the closest thing. Do you think creating more localised farm or food systems in New Zealand will have a key role going forward as part of that?
I think it has to. I'm a big believer in sort of bioregionalism. Mm-hmm. This in the report I talked about how Woolworths had created a North Island distribution centre in Pukekohe, and I did some back of the numbers, sort of back of the napkin maths, and calculated that around 1 million people's fresh produce moves through that one building in the North Island, and based on market share and all that kind of stuff. And from a resiliency perspective, that can't work. From a freshness perspective, that can't work. From a local economies perspective, that can't work. We are so far off what a healthy localized food system looks like that it's quite stark. But that said, the solutions are becoming increasingly available. We're seeing mobile abattoirs kick up. We're seeing the likes of Happy Cow Milk. So we're using technology to shorten that supply chain, most importantly, give farmers the opportunity to capture some value to keep them in business. We at Open Farms we regularly partnered with farmers who are running direct-to-customer businesses. They were probably a good 75% of all hosts, and they were seeing this wonderful sort of economic return, whereby inviting people to the farm means that they've got more followers on social media, they got higher newsletter audiences, they sell product on the day. They're starting to build these really beautiful relationships with their own customers who kept coming back to the farm. But that's a system. That's a system that works, because now you're achieving mental well-being outcomes for those Kiwi families who live urbanly because they can get out to a farm every couple of months. You're capturing more value for the farmer. The food, which is giving them space to regenerative or organic processes, which create better food, which creates higher food quality, which the people are eating themselves, so that it's limiting negative health outcomes. And you sort of kick-started this, instead of a degenerative cycle, and I'm using that from the perspective of sort of society-wide and community-wide, where our health outcomes are degenerating, our mental well-being is degenerating, our connection to nature is degenerating. It's sort of kick-starting this positive cycle of positive reinforcement, and that was just so rewarding to see. And it was, I would come out of those days thinking, this is the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's why we're seeing open farms go from strength to strength as well, is that people are wanting that connection back to the farmer. Are you seeing that as one of the main, I guess, responses of those that are coming along to?
If a farmer puts up an event within 90 minutes of a major urban centre, it books out. Sometimes we've had events that have booked out in 30 minutes. Well, once we turn them on.
Wow.
Yeah. There is this idea that urban people aren't interested in where their food comes from is, right, can I swear? Is this a swearing podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
Bullshit. Complete bullshit. Yeah. People are desperate for connection back to nature. They are desperate to get to know their farmer. They're desperate to know where their food comes from, particularly when they've got young people in their life. That's a very strong pull and sense of responsibility. The thing that's lacking is opportunity. You can go to field days. That's not seeing a farm. You go to a petting zoo. That's agritourism. That's not a real farm. And I was always blown away at how much demand there was. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough places to send them.
Yeah. So with that, I guess as a farmer, there is still a massive opportunity out in this space to tap into.
Absolutely massive. Yep. If I had more time, I'd be working on the next iteration of open farms. I'm sort of getting pulled in 6-7 different directions at the moment. But to me, there is absolutely a vehicle for that. And I would encourage any farmer out there to think of that not only as a sort of public good, hey, I'm just doing it because it makes me feel good, which is really important. Seeing the amount of feedback we had from farmers, that seeing what they do every day through fresh eyes was such a morale boost for them and their team was very surprising. And this sort of loops back to the Nuffield report. I see the next frontier of farming as an experiential model, whereby if we connect farming to the education system, we connect farming to the health system, we connect farming to like the social development and well-being system, the opportunities are endless, because the problems that farming can fix are themselves endless. The example I like to point to is a Dutch farmer who had built 20 grand structure on his property, partnered with a local special needs teacher and the local Ministry for Education, and was using the farm as this platform for young people with learning disabilities and sort of traditional education challenges to learn at. And so that required a little bit of additional skill sets that he had to learn. He didn't run the sessions himself, he had partnered out, but like, how do I design some of my farming systems to allow for more participation, some health and safety stuff for sure. But this is a viable business model. So now, he's making stacks of cash, but 5-10% of his income is now from a regular experiential service from relatively little work. I mean, what a no-brainer. And the impact that his experience is having on the lives of those young people is profound. I've seen so many of these, particularly urban farms that run internships for young people who are kind of losing their way a little bit, and the results are incredible. Like, the power of food and farming to change someone's life cannot be understated. And I always think about the value that internship, I'm thinking specifically of a program here in Australia that takes young people and turns them on farms. We can't quantify that. Because if you find yourself, quote unquote, find yourself as a young person, like I did at 25 on the farm, the value that I brought back to New Zealand over the last 10 years that I've built a business and, done all these things, never mind paying tax, but help new startups get started and all that kind of stuff. For the sake of, 10 grand to put a kid through this, the return you're going to get to society is phenomenal. There is no better ROI. And this stuff has the capacity to happen relatively naturally on our land, just with some system tweaks to incentivize it and to make it easy. Yeah, it's the potential for change gets me up in the morning. It really does.
That's such a cool story, and I think it just shows how many opportunities are out there. Like, that's really thinking outside the box. And the joy that probably brings to the farmer, that 5 or 10% of his business is probably, you can't quantify that either. I recently had Dan Smith from the UK, who's a Nuffield Scholar this year, and he was working on a farm where basically he was taking youth through and teaching them how to farm in a full farming working system. And same thing, he says, like, you can't look at the world in the same way after that, and the experiences you have and just the ability to change someone's life. Like, it's such a cool opportunity, whether it makes you money or not. Like, it's just, yeah.
This is the same strange thing. It makes all of us money. Like,
yeah.
It's about front-loading cost. Okay, what is the cost to someone? My wife was in hospital a couple of years ago, and so you got talking to the people around her and so the other beds. And there are people who've been in there who spent months every year in hospital. And you're like, okay, what if when they were 20 years old, we were able to create a transformational experience through reconnection back to the land for these people? The cost we could have saved as a society, instead of treating the symptoms of what I would assume would be disconnection from the land, lack of exercise and helping people, all that kind of stuff, the symptoms of that, changing that trajectory at that early age, that you can't, millions per person. Yeah, I'm it's not to sort of get political, but this is the one thing I do like from the National Party at the moment is the focus on social investment.
Yeah,
that's it right there. Let's play the long game. Let's boost the right amount of, let's incentivize and invest in transformational experiences for people who need them, and throw money at it. Farmers are a big part of this, because I think as stewards, they are the people's connection back to the land. And with a couple of years, we can turn it around. We really can. It's going to take courage and money and time and effort, and a lot of mahi, but we're not short of ideas. We're not short of options here, not by a long shot.
It might cost money up the front, but like you said, the return on investment is massive. And you've obviously been through a transformational experience in your life, and I've had mine as well, and it really does change your outlook on how you view the world, and I guess how you can give back to other people and ensure that they can have that same experience as well. It's kind of like that pay it forward approach.
Exactly. Yeah. Except we're paying ourselves.
Yeah. As well.
Yeah.
So let's switch now to your work that you do in terms of the writing that you do with Farmers Weekly, Eating the Elephant. How have you enjoyed being able to, I guess, put your thoughts across on those pieces of paper, which are probably read by untold thousands of farmers in New Zealand? Do you enjoy that work as well? Is it a bit of a side to what you currently do?
Yeah, it's a huge privilege, and massive credit to Brian Gibson, the editor at Farmers Weekly, and the whole team for giving us that opportunity. So I write with 3 other Nuffield scholars, and recently we've been sort of inviting other people to write for the column as well. Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like I think I get more out of the writing than other people do, because it's an opportunity to like sort of put some things down and test ideas and see what kind of feedback comes back. And it's funny, like I was looking at some of my old articles the other day just to sort of see how things have changed, and it'll be an interesting way to sort of chart my like descent into radicalism because the older I get, so I have to give. Yeah. And so I've sort of, particularly my most recent articles have focused a lot on the fact that we are moving into a period of profound crisis. I'm a big history nerd. Like, I'm the kind of guy who cooks dinner listening to like 4-hour podcasts on the intricacies of the Cold War, and like talk. Honestly, my favorite topic is to talk about Mongol battle tactics. Like, the Mongolians, granted they did some pretty gnarly stuff, but Like in terms of battle tactics, pretty switched on. So I'm that kind of guy. And being able to apply some of those stories and analogies to our contemporary age, particularly around this idea that we are moving into what is a regular sort of phase of crisis and renewal, where we're sort of calcifying and systems of power and systems of doing things and system meaning have to be broken apart by painful crisis. It's happened before, it will happen again. This is how we change. Having a space to put those ideas out into the world, and most times have people come back, quite positively, gives me an enormous sense of confidence. And also I think mental health, because if they just stewed in my brain, I would go crazy. So it's a real gift. Yeah, I enjoy it a lot.
I'm looking forward to 10 years down the track and seeing how deep you get.
Well, this trajectory, I don't know, it's going to get weird, bro.
Yeah, I look forward to it. So I guess in saying that is just kind of based on your history, you are recognising patterns that generally are happening over and over again in society, and we're currently going to go through one that will see, I guess, a reform on how we do things or view the world, and that generally always makes everything stronger.
Yeah, the more things change, sort of the more they stay the same. The book I've been reading recently that's spoken to this particularly is called The Great Turning by a guy called Neil Howe, and he picks up what is effectively ancient wisdom that every sort of 4 generations, some sort of hinge point, turning point, or crisis point happens that redefines how each of those generations see themselves. His thesis suggests that we are on the cusp of another great turning, another point of crisis. The last one being sort of like World War I, Great Depression, World War II. So there was a long crisis era, and we're on the cusp of another one now. And particularly my generation, I think we're the same age, Millennials, are a generation that plays a really important role in crisis. We're sort of the doers. We're like, oh my God, it's all turning to shit. Quick, work, fix, and we're sort of the builders of the thing that comes new, which is daunting, but also why not us? The GIs and the people who had to trundle off to war would have said, well, why does it have to be me? Well, it just has to be you because that's time, bro. Like that's the generational swing of things, and you're in it. This time will be different because the complexity of the global system. I'm thinking, I often think in terms of energy. A lot of the thinkers and writers I follow end up becoming kind of obsessed with energy, for good reason. Power is everything. It is the be all and end all. A lot of people suggest that it is sort of the foundation of our economic system, that money is a claim on future energy, which is quite an interesting concept. Go back to Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz closes. That's the case in a couple of days. And our entire economic system that we depend on for everything suddenly moves into a state of flux. How we respond to that will set us up for 100 years to come. And that's the kind of calculations and sort of headspace that is the purview of crisis. And I'm relatively confident that we're moving into that kind of space. I don't think it's possible for our systems to keep going the way they are. We've become incredibly top heavy. There's a lot of complexity, and the continued sort of externalization of harm, climate change, soil degradation, water degradation, even human harm, like our attention spans are being cooked by social media. Like even our ability to actually deeply consider and reflect on problems is being hijacked. At some point, the bill comes due. You can't keep undercutting your own capacity to grow and innovate and reflect and learn and find consensus without consequence. And we will experience that in the next few years, the start of that. That's hard. That's really hard to take. I've got a little girl, she's 3 years old, to accept that the peace and prosperity that I had the privilege, and my parents and my grandparents had the privilege of living in, may not be available to her is painful. But she needs me to do everything I can to get us through this period of profound crisis we will find ourselves in as a species, and to do everything I can to build a world in which her and, she's lucky, her kids can live in one day and be proud of and thrive in. And that's the work. That is the work now of everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds pretty heavy, but I think people are slowly realizing that we can't just continue with what we're doing and just continue to grow and grow and grow. Like, something is going to break eventually, and it's probably coming quicker than we think. I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of like Ray Dalio's work around like the monetary systems.
Yep.
That seems to be probably coinciding a lot with this as well. He's saying basically that the global reserve will change hands as it always does every so many years, and it might not be the US dollar anymore. And who's going to rise up and take over that's going to be pretty interesting to happen in our generation as well.
It's all connected. That's this concept of the meta crisis. You can't separate money from energy. You can't separate energy from economic growth, which you can't separate from stable ecology, which you can't separate from the distrust in politics and rise of authoritarianism, which you can't separate from information, which is AI. And like, there's a lot. There's a lot to build. And the sooner we realize that only deep systemic change is the only way through that kind of crisis, because it happened before. Like, I like to think, if you told someone in 1939 that in 10 years they would be at the start of 80 years of unprecedented peace and prosperity, they would have laughed you out of the room. They'd been like, bro, the Europeans have been having at each other for hundreds of years. London's being bombed right now, you idiot. It's not possible. Like, from our vantage point, we struggle to see the type of systemic change that will, by necessity, because we're humans and we're massively adaptable and we have a real thing for survival, regardless of what it takes to do it, that drive will generate the kind of transformational change that right now we balk at and we say, oh, it's not possible, it's not politically possible, or that kind of thing. I'm convinced that is the work of the next couple of years, to build things that right now seem frankly impossible.
Yeah. So with that in mind, how do you see that we can build a thriving or a foundation to our rural communities? Because it feels like they've been somewhat eroded over the last few years with more people moving to town and less opportunities. Do you see a pathway forward for us to start creating that thriving community in our rural areas? Yeah,
big time. And it's none of it's massively complicated. It'd be things like really strong sort of like urban and rural planning systems that really privilege the role of the peri-urban green ring. So what happens in the 50 Ks once the city stops to where proper rural land and life start, having a really clear strategy for those farms should turn inward and start participating in local food economies, directly feeding people in towns, connecting into local schools, connecting to local hospitals, connecting to local retirement villages. Let's change how we do life on those farms. Go further out. You're running 10,000 lambs, rock on roll, man. Let's put them on the boat, get them over to China. It's a good business model. Go for it. But the 10% of food that we consume domestically should be produced locally. And on top of that, we build all these sort of additional positive reinforcement cycles that I talked about earlier. So good, strong planning for how we treat our peri-urban spaces, massive. In the report I talked about understanding food and farming as a public good instead of a commodity market. I think we need to treat food and farming the same way we treat healthcare and education. If politicians came out tomorrow and said we're going to privatize all the hospitals and privatize all the schools, there'd be a revolution. Yet our access to land and the food system in itself, it's particularly the retail side, is owned by 91% of it is owned by 2 for-profit companies. So why do we accept that there needs to be sort of more outcome design? We design education, there are some baselines to education. If you're a Kiwi citizen, you will get access to good schooling. Now, does that always happen in particular regions and there's discrepancies? Yes. On paper, we say that education is a right in New Zealand and it needs to be delivered to these particular standards, or as close to as possible. Obviously, there are problems. Why do we not have the same thing for food? Why do we not set ourselves in our own legislation a baseline that everyone should have access to fresh, healthy, affordable food? That blows my mind, because in my mind, food comes before education. If you haven't got breakfast in your puku, and you're not going to get 2 square meals a day, 2 or 3 square meals a day, education comes second. You can't learn. Like, same thing with healthcare. Food comes before healthcare. So I get that, like, it's weirdly sort of political. Like, you start saying things like public good and government intervention and state control and that kind of stuff. And I'm not suggesting we switch to like bread lines and Soviet models, that kind of thing. But I'm saying we are already there with education and healthcare. Why can't we do the same sort of apply the same sort of principles to food and farming? So I think that's a really important starting point, is understanding this thing as a public good, because it is like education and healthcare. It is something that we build the rest of society on. Without education, you can't have private business. Without healthcare, you can't have, all the other bits and pieces of the market that we build on top of it. We need to start treating food and farming the same kind of respect and honor and investment and guidance and incentivization that we do with healthcare and education if we want to get forward. But again, none of this stuff is massively complicated. It's just political will.
Yeah, and you've definitely raised a really good point there around, if you don't have to worry about food, everything else becomes a lot easier to do, and especially when it comes to learning. Do you think that's why we do really need a strategy or a national strategy around food that helps to, I guess, align our governments, whether they change or not, that they're actually moving towards something, irrespective of who's in?
We absolutely do. A lot of it is sort of a reflection of how we organize ourselves. So I'm blown away that, as you said before, like MPI, or the sort of ministry that organises food and farming, sits separately to health. That blows my mind. Amazed that DOC sits separately to MPI when 24% of our native farmlands on native forests are on sheep and beef farms. So a lot of this is sort of you build that system of silos into sort of a national structure. 70 years later, you get what we've got. So a national food strategy at least starts to repair some of that siloed thinking. So a proper one would be co-designed, would have every voice around the table. Is this stuff hard? Yes, it's flipping hard. Finding consensus is really difficult, but you give people enough time and eventually they find common ground, because that's how we're designed to operate as a species. We will get there eventually. What can't work is just the imposition of one ideology or one group's needs on top of another, which is what we've had. Agribusiness is the king ding-a-ling at the moment. I think it's really hard to argue that. And if you continue to privilege their interests above the 25% of Kiwis that suffer from food insecurity, you're going to get the same results: breakdown in social license, wild political swings, with one government that removes all the regulation, with the next one just to come and reapply it again, so you get economic uncertainty. We have to generate some kind of long-term vision for the role of food and farming in New Zealand society, and I think there are ways in which we can do it where everybody wins. That is entirely plausible. I think this idea of we've always got to have trade-offs for everything, that's not always the case, particularly when it sits around food and farming, which is an act of abundance. I mean, if anyone has seen a thriving food forest or like a really well-run farm, it just pumps. Like, there's enough for everybody. That is not the problem. The problem is the structures of how we distribute it and who generates value from it and all that kind of stuff. So a national food strategy is absolutely critical. And final point on this, it's in the best interest of agribusiness as well. I have sat through so many bloody conferences where everyone says the same thing, like, we need a New Zealand food story. We need to tell, we've got to export health and nutrition. You can't export health and nutrition if 25% of your population are going hungry and you're the third most obese in the OECD. You will be laughed at. As a marketer, you can't do it. It's completely inauthentic. And so to shift to this higher value sort of market of food that we all believe exists, probably does, don't know, we have to disrupt our localized, the domestic food system. Because right now the domestic food system sucks. Like, it really does. It's failing on so many points. We're massively unhealthy. We're failing to feed, huge portions of our society. Control belongs to, a duopoly that's focused primarily on profit. We're eating massive amounts of ultra-processed food. Farmers are losing, there are so many points of failure in the system. The holders of power will benefit when we start building a system that actually starts creating health and creating, people who want to work on farms because they have a healthy relationship with food, and are genuinely interested in it and want to get back out on the land. Like, we'll solve recruitment, we'll solve social license, we'll solve storytelling through system change. And farming organizations and farming bodies need to get in behind this and be the agents of that change. And right now they're being, to a large part, the handbrakes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you just said. Pretty much highlights the whole issue. There's so many parts I really want to talk about within that, but I think that real key part around how we're trying to sell ourselves is health and nutrition, and we've got this really good quality food, but if you actually look at us as a nation, we're not all that healthy. And a lot of that probably comes down to education and lack of connection to where their food comes from. So yeah, I think that first step of actually getting people back towards the farm and educating them, like you said, is such an opportunity for our farmers in the first instance, but then it's building on for that ability to actually then tell that New Zealand food story going forward in the future when we change those things around.
I don't really see another way to do it.
Yeah, I've kind of had like a bit of a light bulb moment there listening to you then. That was that was brilliant.
Good. Well, I'm glad I could help.
Yeah. I'm massively passionate about this whole topic around human health and our food systems, but I had never really coincided the bit around how we actually look as a nation. And I've actually had quite a few topics or conversation with people from overseas thinking that we actually as a nation look quite skinny. But I personally don't see that. I think we're actually getting worse. And you just have to go to the supermarket to see the state of us as a country. It's not what it was 10, 20, or even like, you just look at people from like the 80s or the 70s, like they were so much healthier than they are now. Yeah, it just blows my mind that people from, I guess, maybe the two countries that are above us think we're actually not too bad. But I always I don't see it. I always tell people I don't see that. I think we're getting worse as a country. And to know that we're third, that kind of lines up with what I'm actually seeing in the world.
Yeah. I mean, like, obesity is just one metric.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect metric, but it's one of a handful I'd use. Like diabetes, rate of diabetes in New Zealand's horrendous. But I think that the biggest one is like lack of access to food. I've been privileged all my life, and I've never had to go to the fridge and be like, am I going to have tucker tonight? The fact that 25% of people, 1 in 4 New Zealanders in a country of such abundance, that's their daily reality. That is not just a market failure, that's a moral failure. We should all hang our heads in shame that happens in our country. That's unacceptable. We've got no war, we've got no famine, everything grows like stink here. That's unacceptable. That's a baseline. And the fact that there's been successive political reluctance to turn that around is an indictment of where our political system's at. That a quarter of our population goes to bed every night shows me that our political system as it is failing. Because that's job number 2. Job number 1, protect our shores. Job number 2, make sure everyone's got tucker in their tummies.
Yeah. And isn't it crazy how much we tout that we make enough money for 40 million people in the world, yet we can't feed a quarter of our people here? It blows your mind. And the amount of food waste that happens in our system as well that could be used for those to help feed people as well. It's like, it just blows my mind.
Yeah. But there's lots of options. There's lots of opportunities.
Exactly.
The solutions, Seth Godin is a marketing guy, and his comment that I really like is the hard part is not the doing, it's in the choosing to do. There's no lack of options. It's pretty straightforward. You need a whack of investment, peri-urban planning, as I said, lots of a huge amount of investment in a localized food system, lots of urban agriculture. Could foresee something like a sort of a Kiwi Kai box where it's like a not-for-profit food system that just focuses purely on locally grown whole food, meat, milk, maybe bread, fruit and veg, and paid for. But that's not outlandish. There are local procurement programs. Angela Clifford wrote a beautiful article on this a couple of weeks ago, that there are local procurement programs all around the world in the most hardcore capitalist countries, right through to countries that are really struggling. There are local food economy and local procurement programs are the norm. Our insistence that the food supply belongs almost solely to 2 for-profit companies and some dude in a suit in an office somewhere dictates what I can and can't buy because that's what goes on the shelf is, in this day and age, and understanding the challenges we have around food security and health, frankly absurd.
Yeah, it's insane. And that guy in that suit probably doesn't even live in New Zealand as well.
Yeah.
So he's probably making all these calls. Yeah, lives in Australia, and he's making calls on what we can and can't afford to eat. Angela Clifford is doing some incredible work in this space, and it's a bit of a shame to see. Yeah, I definitely will. And it's a bit of a shame to see her plans around the National Food Strategy kind of get knocked back by the government. I guess it shows that short-sightedness, like they don't see a problem here yet, even though all the signs you've talked about are already there. And there seems to be an increasing amount of people talking about it as well. But will we see that as a topic of conversation at the next election? Probably not.
Not if I have something to do about it.
Yeah.
I haven't got anything to announce today, but there's plans afoot. There's plans afoot.
Yeah.
Cost of living is huge.
That's awesome.
The Albanese government went through cost of living to win their stonking win. I'm amazed that the solutions that our political establishment proposing for cost of living are so weak when it is such a fundamentally powerful political issue.
I would say it's the number one.
It was do a GST off food, fresh fruit and veg. Like, dude, that's a tutu at the edge of the system. That's not system change. Yeah.
No, and they're still so resistant to even doing like that small little change. Like, it's not going to help. So
we'll get there. Don't worry, we'll get there.
Yeah.
The platform just has to burn a little bit more, and then it'll change.
Yeah, unfortunately, we need to burn it down a little bit more to get things to move. So if we look forward to maybe leaning into this, say 5 to 10 years down the track, and we reimagine it the way we farm and feed, how do you think that would look from Aotearoa New Zealand perspective if we did really change these?
I think we'll have to. Either we crash into bioregional food, bioregional fresh whole food, or we plan it. That's I think it's inevitable. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways we'll be happier in that world. The elegant step down, not the crash. Like I got really into sort of purpose at work and meaningful work a couple of years ago, and the amount of young people, millennials and Gen Z, who are unfulfilled at work is something like 70%. Like, jeez. that is mind blowing. That so many of us are doing things that don't feel like add value to our community is a lot. And having taken dozens of people to the farm and planted trees and put them through the yards and all that kind of stuff, not them specifically, sometimes. Maybe. No one comes away from that experience saying what a waste of time. There's a sense of connection to nature and calmness. I mean, this is all backed by data as well. Like, people have put brain scans on people and put them in the forest, and like this is all. You don't even need the data to prove that. Like, just go for a walk. Like, borrow to you, exactly. You walk back, feel better. Like, this is just basic human stuff. Because at the end of the day, we are mostly hairless apes who grew up in this environment. This is our natural home. Like, we spend 95% of the time in a box. That's completely unnatural. Granted, it's nice and warm, particularly tonight. But I guess what I'm going at is we have an opportunity ahead of us while we have to go through a painful crisis and to make, to instigate these actual system changes. I'm so optimistic about the kind of future that we can build, that the kind of future that my little girl is going to live in, because we have at our fingertips the ability to spend a morning growing food for people we love and our community around us, and walk through forests, and in the afternoon sit down at a laptop and design rockets or design incredible pieces of technology. That is achievable. That is so achievable. The thing we've just sort of switched is we've gone too much to living in the digital world and living on our smartphones, and particularly giving the power of those smartphones over to people who haven't got our best interests at heart. They've got our attention and the monetization of our attention at heart. A rebalancing back towards natural life alongside that innovation and that pioneering spirit and that that sense of exploration of frontiers, which is innate in humans. What a cool way to live. What a cool way to live. That's totally doable. I reckon that's where we're going to go. Like, I'm weird. I both love food forests and Star Trek. Like, if I could push those two worlds together, bro, I'm stoked. So that's the long vision. I reckon we'll get there. And New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand's best place to do that. frankly, particularly in a world that is facing ecological instability.
Yeah,
And
I absolutely agree.
More than that, we have a responsibility because our privileged position geographically and that isolation gives us, forces upon us a sense of responsibility to lead. And this is where I get a little bit pissed off as well with agri-sector and our politicians in general. The world needs places like New Zealand where we challenge and we push and we do different things and we fail sometimes. That's okay. That's totally fine. But people need models. They need to see things done differently. And we have every asset on hand to be the place that is this experimental petri dish where, all right, let's play with our systems. We're small enough to do it. We've got a population that's cohesive enough. Let's see if we can switch our health trends from declining to improving in the course of 5 years. Go. And then distribute those findings to the world, in a world that is desperate for solutions to health crises, that is desperate for solutions to ecological crises, that is desperate for a new type of economics that prioritizes well-being just over GDP growth. We have that role. That is our role. That's our responsibility. We're not just some little paddock in the ocean that pumps out lamb for rich people around the world. We have so much more to offer. It brings me a lot of sadness that we've lost that sense of ambition. We'll get it back though.
Yeah. I think we're at that point where we need to find it. We've lost our mojo and we've lost that ambition. And I absolutely agree that we should be that place where we test things and show the way forward for the rest of the world. Like, that could be our role because of all the things you've mentioned. But at the moment, it's like we're too scared to fail, and we'll keep trundling along because it's easy doing what we're doing, because the next iteration is actually scary. But if you look at our forefathers, they would have lent into this, hopefully, and that's why we are where we are today.
Big time. It's a project I've worked on recently is the Common Ground, run by AgMart, to help sort of supercharge collaboration in the sector. And as part of that, I did some research back on the creation of the Commodity Levy Act and sort of the structure of the agri-system at the moment. That was enacted a year after the Berlin Wall came down. And I don't say that disparagingly. I say that in the sense of our sector has gone through such self-inflicted disruption in the 80s that I've still got older friends who tear up about what the sort of economic dislocation and the removal of subsidies and sort of you just got to go for it kind of mentality of the 80s, go big or get out kind of stuff. They still talk with such pain about that. But then look what came afterwards. We are the world's most efficient and arguably best producers of food because of that self-imposed disruption that we went through in the late 80s. The problem is that platform and that system was designed a year after the Cold War came down. And since then, after the Berlin Wall came down, 1991, since then, a few things have happened. Just a couple, slightly different world we're living in.
Yeah.
That same sense of we must do this now to set up the next generation to thrive in the world that they will live in is what is being called upon us to do now. And unfortunately, there's a lot of reluctance to accept that is reality. And every hour we delay makes things harder. I don't know what the solution is. I think things have to get worse before we shift. That's what human beings do, until our hands forced, we don't generally move. I think that time is coming. And that's why it's still a real privilege to be able to work with people like AgMart and Angela and a bunch of other people who are building the shape and the outline of what comes next. And that's my job, is to sort of incubate and help these ideas bake for when they're needed.
That's pretty powerful and very purpose-led. I can see how you have come to be where you are now, Daniel. It's pretty awesome to see. And you're obviously very well versed in this, which I think a lot of people in New Zealand aren't. So it's great to have you sharing your message, even through whether it be Eating the Elephant, Dirt Road Columns, or Open Farms. Like, you're very good at sharing this message with everyone in a way that they can understand as well, which is highly appreciated.
Thanks, mate.
So I think rounding up this podcast, I generally finish with a few quick-fire questions. And the first one is, if you could really change one thing about the agricultural industry, what would it be?
I'd probably sit down and look at how we design our ministries.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sort of system change would create the kind of cascading effects over generations that would give us the things we need to do. So like, why is DOC not with MPI? Could we have a Ministry of Natural Capital? Could we have a Ministry of Health, but broaden that to mean ecological as well as human health? Those kind of questions, I think we can answer them and build structures designed to that would be pretty incredible.
Yeah, that would be really incredible to see what that would actually look like, and what sort of work could be done with that in mind. Next one is, if you're looking back at your younger self, what's one piece of advice you'd give?
Fuck authority.
It's definitely the first time I've had that. That's fucking good.
I had to learn by doing that. Often the people in the room with the best ideas, or who were the most who had the most capacity to influence, weren't the people that were getting paid the most. Often quite the opposite. That status and hierarchy does not fit perfectly with morals and capacity to influence and wanting to do the right thing. So don't generally look up, absolutely, but also look sideways and down, because it's more about values than it is about hierarchy and position.
Awesome, I love that. And what's something that excites you at the moment?
We're on this cusp where there's that wonderful Chinese proverb, "May you live in interesting times," and my God, isn't that the case? We're on the precipice of crisis, but crisis also means change, and I think what we'll see in the next 5 and 10 years is both painful and incredibly exciting, and awful and incredibly hopeful. And it's going to be all of these weird things at the same time. I lean a lot into sort of history, and the accounts of people of living through things like the French Revolution, or even the Industrial Revolution. Like, my God, we invented the concept of time, where everyone walked around with a watch. That blows my mind. That blows my mind that we didn't really think of time the same way. We created the concept of time. At the same time that people were living in absolute squalor and working in horrible machines and industrial and all that kind of stuff. So it's this weird sense of, so when you talk about excitement, that is what excites me, is this capacity for transformational change incredibly quickly as a result of responding to pain. There is a degree of excitement in that, matched by the degree of fear and trepidation.
Yeah. I think it just goes hand in hand, though, doesn't it? If these exciting periods, there's going to be some pain, but when we look back maybe later in our lives, we're like, well, that was actually an incredible time to be alive, and I actually feel fortunate to have gone through that.
Very good point. Grief is a part of this process, big time.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, what's a force of nature to you?
So there's two ways to think about that. One is, what is the definition of a force of nature, and what's an example, I guess. The thing that struck is probably more in that second category, which is people. We are a natural force, and we're a fucking incredible one. What we can achieve and do is so deeply profound. That goes two ways. We can fuck things right up, and we are. Don't diminish our capacity to shoot ourselves in the foot. But that's balanced then by this incredible capacity to do amazing things. When we work collectively and we work from the right sort of values and purpose base. I think people are actually a massive force of nature, and now's the time to lean into that good stuff. Yeah,
I totally agree, and that's part and parcel one of the reasons why I've called my business the Force of Nature Consulting, is because of the people and recognising what an incredible force they can be, for good and bad. But it's an awesome note to finish on. Thank you very much for coming on today, Daniel. I know we've tried a couple of times, but it's good to finally get you on, and we really touched on some awesome topics today that I'm really happy to share with the listeners. I think it's cool to discuss these things in a bit more in depth and make people aware of things they may not be aware of within our food system in New Zealand.
Pleasure's mine, mate. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.